Good morning. My name is Bilal Iftikhar. I am a PhD student in Georgia Tech and I am affiliated with Georgia Water Resources Institute GWRI. The co-author of this research is Dr. Aris Georgakakos. He is a director of GWRI and a professor in Georgia Tech. GWRI is one of 54 National Water Resources Institute, the mission of which is to support US states and territories to address major water resources issues and challenges. In addition, Dr. Georgakakos' research group has expertise and involvement in several water resources management areas. For this conference, our team contributed 4 articles in research management, in situ water quality assessment, remote sensing of lake water quality, and web-based information systems for environment, water resources, and power system applications. This article is about optimal delineation of reservoirs operating zones with application to the ACF basin. The presentation is divided into 6 subsections. Reservoirs provide many vital environmental and social services. Reservoirs management has been an active research area for several decades, with notable methods accounting for multiple objectives, large and complex river networks, uncertain inflows, adaptive inflow forecast, and projected changes in hydro-climatic and socio-economic conditions. However, reservoir management practice is largely based on empirically established storage zone. Like in the picture, you can see that the storage of the reservoir is divided into different zones: flood zone, conservation zone, inactive zones, and each zone has their pre-described release rule. If the lake level is in the conservation zone, then there are certain pre-described rules, and then you operate the reservoir on the basis of those rules. So the question is that how can practice the leverage of modern advances in reservoir management? Study work plan is divided into 4 main objectives. The objective 1 is the development of a fully adaptive optimization scheme for the reservoir system. And the second one is the retrospective assessment of reservoir system response under various hydroclimatic and socio-economic scenarios. The third one is the delineation of the concurrent seasonal zones at all system reservoirs based on the optimal reservoir sequences that we derived in objective 2. The fourth and the final one is the performance assessment of the optimized versus the original or the current zones through detailed head-to-head simulations with the US Corps of Engineer HACRESIM modeling. Study area is the ACF Basin. ACF Basin is in the south of US. It's between 3 states, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, and Flint are the main rivers of the ACF Basin. ACF Basin started from the north of the Georgia and its end in the Florida after passing through the Georgia and Alabama. So ACF Basin approximately hosts 4 million humans and a wide variety of plants and animal species. In last 3 decades, due to increase in population and climate change, water demand for each state has been increased, which resulted in a conflict between the states. That's why these states are in the litigation from last 3 decades. In the ACF Basin, Lake Lanier, West Point, George, and Woodruff are the main reservoirs, and among all those reservoirs, George has the highest capacity to produce a hydel power generation, while Lake Lanier has the highest storage capacity. This slide showed the comparison of ACF Basin main reservoirs storage abilities versus the local annual impaired flows to those reservoirs. This pie chart represent each reservoir storage contribution to the whole ACF basin storage. It reflected that the Lake Lanier has 63% storage capacity of the whole basin, while Woodruff has 4%. And on this pie chart, we can see the percentage of reservoir drainage with respect to the whole drainage area of the basin. So here you can see that the Woodruff has 53% of the drainage area of the whole ACF basin. In this graph, we can also see that the reservoir like Lake Lanier has the highest storage capacity, while has due to small drainage area has a very small percent of the annual local unimpaired flows as compared to the whole basin. While the Woodruff, that is the smallest reservoir, while due to large basin drainage area, so they have large amount of annual local unimpaired flows. We can also see that in this graph, here is a Lake Lanier, and that is the catchment of Lake Lanier, and here is West Point, and that is the catchment area of West Point, and here is George, and that is the area of George, and here is Woodruff, and that is the catchment area of Woodruff. So that made Basin more vulnerable to seasonal and climate change. That is why we wish to investigate if it's possible to improve the current operational zones. These are the current zones of the main reservoirs of the ACF Basin. Buford or the Lake Laniers zones are here. This is for the West Point and this is for the George. Uh, those are divided into 4 zones. Each zone has predefined rules. I will show those rules as an example in the next slide. Here you can see the release rules for Lake Lanier. So it is like that if the level of Lake Lanier is in the zone 1, then it will follow these rules, and if the lake level of the Lake Lanier in zone 2 or zone 3, it will follow that. And those rules are in the decreasing order priority. What does it mean? Once the highest priority rule has been achieved, the reservoir operation focus on meeting the next priority rule, and so on. Similarly, these are the release rules for West Point and George, and also this is the release rule for the Woodruff, and Woodruff has a high constraint because it has to release a minimum of 4,550 cubic downstream of the reservoir to fulfill the aquatic-like requirement in the Apalachicola Bay. In the ACF Basin, hydroelectric power generation facilities are operated by private power companies, municipalities, and U.S. Corps of Engineers. SEPA is responsible for marketing electric power of the reservoirs controlled by U.S. Corps of Engineers. U.S. Corps of Engineers operated those plants as a peaking plants. What does it mean? They increase the discharge for a few hours each day to nearly the full capacity of one or more turbine of the reservoir and provide electricity during the peak demand periods of each day and week. During the dry periods, as the level of the lakes go down below the zone 1 or zone 2, the hydroelectric power generation is reduced proportionally as pool levels decline. ACF Basin lakes are one of the most visited U.S. Corps of Engineers controlled lakes in the U.S. And those recreational activities in the ACF Basin lakes include boating, freshwater and saltwater fishing, camping, hiking, picnicking, and these recreational activities contribute about 600 million each year to the local and the regional economy. Those recreational opportunities depend on the lake's levels. That is why U.S. Corps of Engineers identifies certain levels in the lake's impoundment at which the recreational activities would be affected. Initial impact level, recreational impact level, water access limited level. So the objective or the target of the optimal operation is to avoid that the lakes will go beyond those levels so that the recreational activities will not be affected. Methodology to attain the objectives that we defined earlier. In order to develop a fully adaptive optimization scheme for the ACF Basin, we develop a GWRI dynamic optimization model that is the true representation of the model, and then run that optimization model over the study period of 1939 to 2011, and then get the optimized sequences, and on the basis of those optimized sequences develop a revised operational zones for each reservoir. And then to develop a performance assessment comparison, we use a HackREST sim and run with the optimized and the current zone with the same release and the other system inputs and requirements, and compare the results. This is the complete methodology of the research, and if anybody interested to know more in detail, we are happy to answer in the question and answer sessions. This slide showed the comparison of current zones with the proposed zones of the main reservoirs of the ACF Basin. This is for the Buford Dam or the Lake Lanier, and this is for the West Point. These are the current zones and these are the proposed zones. In proposed zones, we keep the same ceiling level of conservation zones as of current zones to avoid any tedious legal and administrative approvals for Corps of Engineers to implement those zones. And additional operational zone has been added to the Lake Lanier, West Point, and George to operate those reservoirs more optimally. Also, those zones are tandem with the same zones in the downstream reservoirs. It means if the downstream reservoir storage is lower than the upstream reservoir, and additional releases are made from the upstream reservoir to keep all the reservoir of the basin in the same zone. This slide represents HACRAS-SIM simulated results with both proposed and current guided zones over the modeled period of Lake Lanier, West Point, George, and Woodruff. Black color reflected proposed operational zones while red represents current operational zones. You can see that the proposed operational zones perform better because in mostly they keep the lake levels above the current operational zones and have a less spillage and more hydropower generation under the same constraints and requirement. This slide showed the comparison of the main ACF basin reservoirs lake level response in frequency form under current guided rules. Those are reflected in blue, the results for each reservoir, and for the proposed or the optimized zones, the results are reflected in red. This shows that the optimized zones maintain higher lake levels than the current zones. The average level increase across the frequency range for the Lake Lanier is about 0.68 feet. For the West Point is about 0.34 feet, and for the George is about 0.15 feet, and for the Woodruff is about 0.10 feet. And these levels are for the impact levels for the recreational activities. The green color is the level where the initial impact started, and the second one, the blue one, is for recreational impact level, and the third one that is in black is water access limited level. So here you can see that for with the proposed zones, the lake level for the West Point is go below water access limited level only less than 1%, while with the current operational zones it goes more than 10%. So it has more impact on the recreational activities with the current operational zones as compared to the proposed zones. This slide also compares reservoirs levels again, but for the 10 driest years of the record. The purpose of this comparison is to understand how these proposed or the optimal zones perform under the dry seasons. The figures shows that the relative performance of the optimized zones increases during the dry periods. Specifically, the average level increases across the frequency ranges are now 0.41 feet for Lake Lanier, 1.59 feet for West Point, 0.76 feet for George, and 0.14 feet for Woodruff. And also, at a specific frequency regions, the optimized zones level exceeds from the current zones level by as much as of 2 feet. And also, as for recreational targets, you can see that with the proposed zone, the levels go only less than 10% from the water access limited level, while for the West Point it goes with the current zone more than 40%. Slide compares the performance of the optimized versus current zones with respect to the fifth percentile of the system energy generation. This statistics used as an indicator of dependable energy and capacity production. For power targets, as we can see here, we assign the same power target as of the current zones. But as we have 5 zones in proposed operation instead of 4, that is in the current operation, we assign same target to proposed zone as of the current zone if that zone lie in the same region of the current zone. This graph represents the monthly average power production of the ACF basin over the model period, and here blue represents the results from current operation, and while red represents the results from the proposed operational curve. And here we can see that the 4% increase in energy relative to the current zone. It also helps or allows SEPA to assess more accurately the ACF basin true energy production and its maximize SEPA's value to its customers. This slide also compares the performance of the optimized versus current zones with respect to the fifth percentile of the system energy generation for each reservoir. For the lake linear, the increase of the fifth quintile power generation is about 19%, and for the West Point is about 13.63%, and for the George is about 2.9. And from here we can conclude that if the reservoir have the largest storage capacity, it has more potential to improve the hydel power generation. There are three main conclusions of the research. The number one is the reservoir management agencies can improve the operation of their system by optimizing the reservoir zones they are in use. The second one is that such improvements are expected to be higher in systems where relatively large reservoirs. Additionally, the retrospective assessments not shown here demonstrate that the performance improvement can be increased by two ways. Number one, additionally optimizing the release rules associated with each reservoir zone, or optimizing the zones and rules adaptively with the information from a reliable seasonal inflow forecast. Acknowledgement: this work was partly supported by the Georgia Water Resource Institute and partly by the fellowship from the Fulbright Foundation. These are the references. Thank you so much.